Good evening, everybody. My name is E.R. Anderson. I'm the executive director of Karis Circle. Karis Circle is the nonprofit programming arm of Karis Books, and Karis Books is the South's oldest independent feminist bookstore. We are delighted to be here tonight celebrating Monster in the Middle, Tiffany Yanique's brand new book, hot off the presses. She is joined in conversation tonight by Gloria Edim, who is the founder of Well Read Black Girl. It is a book club and digital platform that promotes Black literature and sisterhood. Gloria won the Innovators Award at the 2017 Los Angeles Times Book Prizes, and Edim is the editor of Well Read Black Girl, Finding Our Stories, Discovering Ourselves, and the forthcoming On Girlhood 15 Stories from the Well Read Black Girl Library, which Karis will be celebrating next Tuesday in a group event that will be with several other bookstores. So we're really excited about that, and it is with the one and only Edwidge Danticat, which we are super excited about. So that's going to be a lovely conversation. So just go ahead and register for that as soon as you get off this event. We know you're going to want to come back. But the person of the evening tonight is Tiffany Yanique, who is the author of the award-winning novel Land of Love and Drowning, as well as the poetry collection Wife. She's the winner of the 2014 Center for Fiction First Novel Award and a National Book Foundation 5 Under 35 honoree. She has also received a Rona Jaffe Award and a Fulbright Scholarship. Her short fiction has been published in The New Yorker and anthologized in Best American Short Stories 2020. She's originally from the Virgin Islands, and now we are very lucky that she lives here in Atlanta, Georgia, and is a professor at Emory University. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks to all of you in the audience for sticking with us. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the Ask a Question box. But mostly we're just going to dig right into it because we have a sort of short amount of time. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, ER. Welcome. Hi, everyone. We're so excited to be here. Tiffany, congratulations. How are you feeling? It's day 2 of Pub Day.
Glory, thank you so much for doing this event with me. I feel so lucky to have you. And, you know, we go way back to early days. And I feel so lucky to be part of this community that, like, we're still doing it. It's just such a blessing. And to ER for sticking through with the tech, and thanks to all of you guys in the audience for waiting around since we were messing with the tech. I am actually in the Virgin Islands, which is probably part of the reason why the tech was a little bit complicated for a while there. The internet isn't great on the island, but I'm actually here for a family event, not a good one. I'm here for a funeral, actually. Okay. And I felt like in the middle of my book launch, like my book launch happened yesterday, and then I had to fly home for a funeral the day after. Something about that, and the person in my family who's passed is someone who lived an incredibly joyous life, a life of incredible effervescence and fun. And that's all everybody is talking about. 87 years of like party and love. And I thought, like, there's something about that is also maybe about Monster in the Middle, like the tension between like the joys of life and like the disappointments of life, like my book launch, then a funeral, like the tension between like what it means to be part of a family, part of a community. So it seems kind of right in a way that I'm right now in a family house, like not in my own house, talking about this book that's about family, that's about the importance of ancestors, that's about the people who are gone, and the impact that they have on us and our lives. So yeah, I'm feeling quite philosophical about it, but really, really excited and happy to be here. Also, big up to all the Emory people that are in the audience. That's super cool. Thank you, Emory.
Every time I talk to you, you just have such great energy, and you just have like a awesome outlook on life, and that it's always reflected in your work as well. And I think one thing I love about your writing is how it's so grounded in your identity and in your voice, and even just like what you shared about your aunt and passed away, who has like this, she always was full of such life. And I think that's something that's definitely when I say work, I mean, it's like you're writing, but it's just like you're teaching. Everything that you do has like this energy and it feels very grounded. Can you talk about that process for writing Monster in the Middle? Like how you were able to, because it feels like it steps into this whole world immediately as a reader. And was that intentional? Like with the landscape, with the setting, the craft of the sentences, everything felt just very curated in such a beautiful way.
Oh, thank you, Glory. I really believe in the importance of geography. Like I really think that like the place that you are in physically has an impact on you. Like it affects like the people that are around you have an impact on your pheromones. If you wake up in the morning and have sunlight on you, or if you wake up in the morning and it's rainy, that affects your day. You know that impacts you. And so I feel like, growing up on an island, that has affected my whole personality. And I would be a very different person, even with the same family, if I had grown up on a mountain, right? So because I believe that, like I wholeheartedly believe that, Jamaica Kincaid, who is quoted in Monster in the Middle, says, and I'm going to get her quote wrong, but she says something to the fact that the place that you are from, you and the place where you are from are so meant to be that it is beyond words. Like it is who you are, right? This landscape, this space, and she means the physical space because it's a quote from a book that's about physical space. So because of that, I write with that in mind. Like I just think building lush scenery, like paying attention to sounds and smells is really important. At the same time, I am very resistant to like cliches about the Caribbean. So I'm not going to have a whole lot of palm trees and coconuts in my stories. I want to think about the environment that matters to the actual characters, that matters to the people who are from that place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought that up because the book does span, like it goes from Ghana to South Carolina to Puerto Rico to Fort Jackson. Like you have all these like different spaces, but yet it doesn't feel forced. It does like feel as if it relates to the character's experience and what they're going through. So I was really taken by the character Stella because of her coming of age story, especially when she's in Ghana. Can you talk, because it's usually when there's a coming of age story, it tends to be really tense and there's something bad tends to happen, right? But you kind of flip that a little bit with her character. Can you talk about the decision of making Stella, in my opinion, a more carefree character and one who has like reservations, but they don't hinder her progress or her as a character?
I think, I actually think in many ways, Stella, although she has a lot of trauma and loss in her history, her mother was an incredibly effervescent, positive person. Mermaid is her mother. And Mermaid story is also one that is sort of dark and creepy, but Mermaid herself has a spin on it that is like, that I chose love, and that's something to celebrate. Yeah. And I actually think that Stella, having been raised in that house with Mermaid, having been loved well by her mother and her stepfather, believes in like what are the lenses that you wear when you are seeing your own story? What is the veneer that you put over when you see your own story? And that really impacts, how you come to understand and live inside your story. And I grew up in super rough circumstances. I grew up in a very rough neighborhood in St. Thomas, a place where tourists would never go. A place where most Virgin Islanders would never go. Very dangerous area. And most Virgin Islanders know my area. The area is called Round the Field because it was always in the newspaper for murders and drug assaults. So people will be like, oh, you from Round the Field? Oh, shoot. Like, I mean, they know Round the Field, but they've never been there, right? And yet I feel that I was deeply loved by my grandparents who raised me. And so I feel like that love allowed me to even see my neighborhood as something that had incredible beauty in it, that boys that I dated in my neighborhood, half of whom, I'm not being flippant. I sound flippant, but I'm actually so serious. Like half of who ended up in jail, that they were like artists also. Like, the guy who ends up in jail for possession was a painter. The other guy who ends up in jail for attempted murder was someone who used to spit poetry. And I feel like the beauty was always there in the mess of life. And I want complicated characters, and so I want them to be the kind of people who see beauty. I just think, you know, novels about Black people, we often have like so much fucking sorrow in them.
Yes.
Because sometimes Black life is very sorrowful. But none of us can stay alive if we only focus on the sorrow. And I think like when you look at a whole life, people who make it like through life, like intact enough, they are people who are willing to find beauty even in the tumult. And I actually think most of us are, I think most humans are like that. You know, most humans want to find beauty, seek out beauty, will laugh at a joke even as they're toiling, will whistle even as they're being shackled, because we just long for beauty. So I always want to make sure that my characters are living in that truth, that all humans are always like longing for joy and beauty.
I think you have achieved that in your book. There is this yearning, and there's this very clear desire, especially between Fly and Stella. Like you want them to win. At least there were so many moments where I was just like rooting for them, and I saw just like the complication of what love could be, especially young love. Like, and you bring us into that immediately, like right in the second chapter. Can you talk about the crafting of those two characters and what came first? Was it, because you've talked about landscape, was it more the setting and feel like building out the plot that way, or did you really hone in on the characters first and know that you have them and then add the details to the story?
So this book took me a long time to write. I've been saying it took me about 7 years. And then somebody forwarded me an email where I had given a reading 14 years ago from a piece that's a chapter in the book. And I was
wow.
Oh shit, I've been working on this like somewhere in the back of my brain, even while I was working on Land of Love and Drowning and my story collection. And I do think that this is probably my best book ever, because I put a lot of care and attention into the character development, into like my choice of language.
It's very obvious. I mean, all of your books are incredible, but with this one, I sat with it even further, because I got 2 copies of it, because I was like reading it. I was like immersed in it on a plane. I left it on the plane. I was like, oh no, I need to get it again. And so I was so, yes. Continue. I just wanted to go you achieved it, because I was just so like really engrossed in the story. And I love the fact that it has like these flashbacks, and it feels contemporary as well. It just is so like lively and rich, and there's so much you can take from it in terms of the themes. Anyway, I'm interrupting. Continue what you're.
I'm grateful for your like positive interruption. Each chapter is a self-contained piece. And I am trying to do multiple things, and I worked a long time on the project, so I think I'm hitting a lot of the notes that I was attempting. So like every section is looking for a new kind of tonality. Every chapter is looking for a new way into narrative storytelling. So I was really interested in some chapters. I'm focusing on character. I'm focusing on beauty. I'm focusing on this particular character's movement in the world. Other stories, I'm really focusing on like the history of the time period, because it's really a historical novel also. And I'm really thinking about like, how does history affect people? In some chapters, I'm thinking about this tension between community and the individual, and I'm sort of a philosopher in other chapters. And I'm a poet in other chapters. So I'm really thinking through different registers in the book. And I hope it's the kind of book that, you can read and feel like you're on an arc and the arc is very strong, and you want to know what happens next. But I hope it's also the kind of book that you can be like, like I need to put it down and think for a second. Like I also hope that it's that kind of book. I mean, those are my favorite kinds of books where you have to put it down and kind of stare into space for a second. And that's kind of what I'm hoping the response is from my reader.
I think what I like to call that is the, once you read something, you have to like go stare at the wall for a little bit so you can like really process and understand what you've read, and also bring, a lot of times when one is reading, that there is a moment of being like self-reflective and like how does this conversation or how does this character influence my world, or like do I see myself in this? And I think for Monster in the Middle, there are so many layers of themes, which I found really profound in terms of the reading experience, especially from a craft perspective. And you've touched on this a little bit, but in terms of the thematic pieces, there's death, there's loss, there's intimacy, memory, drama, there's like all these things. And I'm curious about your process of making sure the meaning was coming through, because like you said, you worked on this over 14 years. There's so many things that you were very focused on, but how did you make sure like you were like, was that the process of you and your editor? Like, how did you know it was landing the way you wanted it to land?
Well, I have an amazing editorial team at Riverhead. I have to say it in this way because it's, especially since we're at Karis Books, I have an amazing team of women at Riverhead. Like it's just badass women, like just flooding through that. And they are very attentive, very supportive. They read the work with a lot of care. And this was a project that took me a long time. So, I would step back in, like I would go away for years and then bring it back to them and then go back away for years. And they were very patient with me, and would give me little comments here and there as editors do. I have to say this because sometimes people think that the editor actually helps you with the writing. My editors don't do that at all, right? They're just sort of helping me with think through big concepts. Mostly the big concepts that I want, like the meaning that I want to glean, and then they let me know how that's working. So in this, the way that I edit though, which is probably why it takes me a long time to write a book, is I read over and over and over again. And since these chapters were published as standalone stories, my revision process to make sure that the meaning was coming through meant reading the whole project again and again and again. Like, am I pulling through loss? Am I pulling through like our attention to our bodies as we get older, as we move through puberty and become sexualized beings? Am I moving that through, right? Am I moving through all the Invisible Man references in the novel? Like, I mean, are you at the, at some point in the novel, the book Invisible Man arrives in as an actual object in the novel. But I planted references to it like very early on in the narrative. And I'm like, okay, am I making sure that that's pulling through, right? There's a whole other narrative about the sea and whales and mermaids and the importance of water. Okay, is that coming through all the way? And it is the meaning of what I want that to do, is that really strong in the character. So if an Ellison person who loves Invisible Man, would they be able to pick up on like the resonances? And I actually have a Ellison scholar who read it recently, and she was like, how did you know to put it early on in Fly's character? And I was like, you got it. Yes, like I accomplished it. So yeah, but I read. A lot of writers are first and foremost readers.
Yes,
I think only the good ones always are, right?
It's true.
And so like reading is a huge part of my process.
It's so wonderful to hear that, because I did pick up on those like Easter eggs you had like thrown out in the book. Another thing I was thinking of is just who your book is in conversation with. I love to do pairings of books, and it made me think a lot of Caitlin Greenidge, and it is her writing style that is just so like has such richness and like depth to it, but it also is like sharp and funny and witty. It has a good balance of giving us just as much information, but also giving us the agency to make our own decisions about the characters and how we feel about the story itself. So I was thinking a lot about, it's like, oh, like I feel like if, Caitlin Richard book, like she would just absolutely love to be in conversation. That's another part of your tour. You definitely need to be in conversation with Caitlin. But are there other things that you are reading or you feel or other authors that you feel are influences in kind of, I don't want to use the word inspire, but just like, or offer you just like a springboard or give you just another sense of like looking at work in a more meaningful way?
So I've mentioned Invisible Man already. I would also say that I think Caitlin and I are definitely in conversation with each other. Like my first novel, Land of Love and Drowning, really talks a lot about freedom and the importance of like belonging. Caitlin's new novel is about freedom and belonging. Yep. And I think like I am also, I mean, that novel that Caitlin just published is also about romantic love. Mm-hmm. And like here I am writing a novel about romantic love. So I definitely feel like Caitlin and I are like spiritual sisters in many ways. Like we're just kind of vibing back and forth. We don't read each other's work, so I don't know what's happening with us, but we do seem to be on very similar kinds of wavelengths. But more formally, I would say I always am in conversation with Jamaica Kincaid. She is my like literary mama. Yeah. And thinking through her ideas about the female body and also trying to apply that to the male body, because this is a book about masculinity and femininity. And both characters are really equally weighted, I hope, for the reader. So thinking through like using her to think through the body. I'm always also in conversation with Gabrielle Garcia Marquez, who writes about sensuality and love in a serious, sophisticated, beautiful way. And that's something that was important to me in this book because it's a love story. But it's also like a very, I believe, a very serious piece of literature. Like and I'm trying to, make the argument that love is worthy of like complicated, non-cliche sentences. That romantic love is worthy of philosophizing. It's worthy of our intellectual thought. And I actually think like literature has kind of shove that aside. Like if you're writing romance, like you're like in the you're like in the trash like bin.
Yeah, it's such a odd, I'm glad you brought that up because it's such an odd way to think about like because if you think about it, all like the romance novels, all the Jane Eyre, all those things that people like are considered high literary things, it's all about love. It's all about relationship. It is like completely about that. So to make it seem like romance is this flippant thing that can't be intellectually stimulating is ridiculous.
Right. But it's at some point we've decided that that's the case, right? Yeah. Like we decided and I think it has to do with gender, family member. I think it's to do with gender. Like, women were writing about love. Men were writing about like serious endeavors, unless they were queer men, and then they might be writing about love. But like, the heteronormative dudes were writing about politics and like social ills, as if love is not also political and social. Of course it is. Jane Eyre makes that super clear. I mean, all the Austen books make that super clear. But I think I wanted to not be afraid of being pigeonholed she's a girly writer. Like this is a romance novel, but it's also a novel about what it means to be American, the politics of Blackness. It's also about the body. It's about like the tension between like wanting to be an individual and also like a longing to be part of community.
Yeah. Can we expand a little bit about what you just mentioned, the politics of Blackness and how we can move against the stereotypes of what it means to be a Black person? I feel like within your characters, especially with Fly and Stella, like you break open those stereotypes and challenge them in a lot of ways. Can you expand on that? Was that an intentional choice to make them just feel like multifaceted and more well-rounded characters?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of my choice in the book is to put two different kinds of Blacknesses beside each other. So it's like Stella is from the Caribbean. She's from the Virgin Islands as I am. And so she's a kind of an immigrant Blackness, Caribbean Blackness, which is a very different kind of flavor of Blackness than like Southern African American Blackness, which is what Fly coming from, right? Fly is from Atlanta, which is where I live now. And that's a very different flavor and positionality. Like, what does it mean to come from what we might call like good old slave stock, American slave stock, versus coming from this at least imagination that many of us Caribbean people have of like super multiculti, like kumbaya-ness. Like, oh, we're all like, I'm every race is inside of me. That's a very Caribbean gesture. So like, what does it mean when you put these two kinds of Blacknesses together? And I think what I hope the reader learns, what I know that Stella and Fly learn, is that Blackness is complex. And that it's not one thing, and that it is it's beautiful, but it's strange. It gets expressed in different kinds of ways. It can be problematic when different kinds of Blacknesses crash against each other. You know, I think that Stella and Fly probably stereotype each other a little bit, and have to move through some of that stereotyping. So like, we have our own complicated stuff, and I'm very resistant to cliches about like Black suffering, even though I think my characters do suffer a hell of a lot. But I
don't think that their suffering is only related to their Blackness. It's just, you know, the suffering is the suffering, you know, it's like the experiences they go through are human in my perspective, you know?
That's the idea. I hope that their suffering is it's human realities. They experience them because they're Black, but they also
exactly.
Like all the things, you know, they're just fully human characters. They are not only their racist experience.
Exactly. And I think that was that feels like a very like intentional choice because I did notice the dynamics between them two, like them seeming like opposites, but also having so much to gravitate towards and love for each other. Another thing I wanted to talk about, which could feel like an obvious question, but just like the title of the book and how you landed on that. I love there were so many like different like metaphors that I saw reading. So I have my ideas, but I'd like to hear it from like straight from you, like what that title means and how you landed on it.
I would so much rather hear your ideas, Glory. I feel the book is dedicated to my monsters, and then I name my children. I have 3 children, and I name each of them, and they're my monsters. So in some ways, because that's a very early part, I mean, that's like the first thing from me that you read when you open the book is my dedication. It kind of, I hope, gives some idea of what the monster might be. If the monsters are my children, like I'm saying, at least in part, I think I'm saying a couple of different things, but at least in this way, I'm saying that like the monster is about like family, and is about it's about the roots and the histories that get passed down in genealogies. And that you're always seeing like you're always like horrified when the traits that you really were annoyed at with your mother like show up in your fucking children. Like that's monstrous to us, and yet it's also really beautiful. It should be both monstrous and a kind of sublime. And so I'm interested in that tension too, like how the things that we are afraid of might also be the things that we should hold as holy.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's such a beautiful thing. I recently had my first child, my first little monster, and I noticed that he has like a birthmark similar to me that I was like growing up. I was always annoyed at it. I wanted to get it removed. I just did not like it. And then the moment I saw it on my son, I was just like, oh, there's something that, you know, it made me think about like myself differently. It made it like this thing that I thought was so imperfect and flawed. Like when I saw it on my son, like I was like, oh, I love this now. You know, like it brings us together. So
Yes.
I did see these moments of like family can be a monster in itself, and also not knowing your space in your family or how you belong or how to navigate family and feeling like an outsider in your family. That's what I was like feeling the idea of like monster in the middle, like trying to sort out those feelings and that longing for to belong in a space. Because, you know, some people think like innately because you're part of a family, like you will belong, but that's not always the case.
No. I mean, some of us have to go find. I think Black or white, like Asian, Latinx, I mean, we all have complicated family realities, and some of us were loved in abundance. Some of us were loved good enough, and some of us maybe like really did not have enough at all. And that, you know, has had an impact on how we understand what love is and how we go forward.
Yeah. I want to let me so the book is also there's like it's contemporary, so there it's like present day, and I it made me think of the pandemic, you know, and everything that's been happening with even like in this current moment. Can you talk about just like how the pandemic has really affected your sensibilities as a writer and a reader? Or even more broadly as an artist and a human, has it changed, made you slow down? Have you become like more self-compassionate? How has this moment, current moment, like changed you as a person?
You know, I could actually begin with talking about writing Monster in the Middle, because originally Monster in the Middle was going to end with Hillary Clinton becoming president. That's what I thought was going to happen, right? And so that was going to be that was going to be the now of the novel. And so I was writing towards that and revising towards that. When that didn't happen, I had to like unravel all of those revisions, then revise again with this new reality in mind. And so the novel actually comes all the way up to the pandemic. Like the last chapters are happening at the beginning of the pandemic in New York, which, as we all know, was at least the U.S. center of the pandemic in the very beginning. And so I have us really there at the start of the world that we're all living in now. I know that like people who read the book in like 10 years aren't going to have the experience the people who read the book now are going to have, which is like all of this history lands on now. Because the book is about the like it ends at the pandemic, right? So like the book begins in the 1960s and then comes all the way up to like our actual now. And I think I really wanted my readers to have that experience, that kind of like stare at the wall experience where you think, how do these characters, what do they mean to me as a reader? But I don't know, how does the pandemic affected me as a writer and a reader? I mean, my kids were home with me for a year, you know? It was very hard to write during that time period. At the same time, I read so much, in part because my kids and I became like readers together. Like we started doing things where we would just read together. Like my eldest is 10 and, you know, we would just like, he would be laying in bed and I'd be laying in bed and we'd read together. We never done that before. So I actually ended up reading a lot more. There was a lot more just space in the day. And reading does inspire me to write. So it had a good impact. You know, after I got over the hump of just being exhausted and busy all day long, reading actually got me excited about writing again.
That's awesome. What are you reading now, out of curiosity?
What am I reading now? Well, you know, I've traveled. So the book that I brought with me on the plane is the O. Henry Prize collection of 2021 that was edited by Chimamanda Adichie. And I'm actually in it, which is really exciting. And it's, you know, Chimamanda did a really incredible job editing this O. Henry. I mean, I pat myself, she picked me, but also like she picked such an incredible array of writers. And I do like to read like whenever I end up in an anthology, I like to read my companions, you know, like, what is this that I'm in? I am now in a community. Like, what's the community that I'm in? So I wanted to read the other, like my community mates and see what they're up to. And it's a really profound collection, anthology, actually. Yeah.
That's amazing. We're going to take some time, see if anyone has any questions. There's some incredible people in the audience. They are bigging you up from Emory and from the Auburn Avenue Research Library on African American culture and history. There's so many amazing people here. So I want to just make sure if there's time for audience questions. We have about like 5 more minutes or so. Does anyone have any questions for Tiffany? Oh, there's things coming up in the chat. Oh, that's amazing. People are shouting out. If not, I think I also wanted to, I have my questions too. Let me go back here. we talk. Oh, this was another. Okay, there's so many different like areas that I wanted to talk about. So the road trip from. Let me make sure I'm just gonna pull up my book, but hold on. I have so many. When we're done with this, I'm going to send you a picture of my book because I have so many notes at the margins. I'm like, what does this mean? And who's this? Like I was doing so many. Let me see here.
Yeah, the first chapter is a road trip. I have those characters, Gary and Ellie driving.
Ellie, yes. I was like, where can I find Ellie's name?
Yeah,
I was like,
her name is complicated because it's somebody else's name in the book too. So it's like,
yes.
Ellie.
Wait, so why did you do that? With that, you're like, because that's another reason when I'm reading stories that have like long, like I did with this with like with The Color Purple and other books, like when they have like long family histories, or even like Angela Flournoy's like The Turner House. Like I love to make my own little like family tree of how everyone is related. So yeah, keep going though. Like what was the significance of like the road trip aspect?
So the book has ended up being a book about what it means to be American. And that in many ways was prompted by the election in 2016. Yeah. The fact that it didn't go as I thought it was going to go, I was one of the naive ones. It made me really think like, I'm from the Caribbean. Virgin Islanders are a colony of the United States. I wondered, like, when we're in the Virgin Islands, we don't think of ourselves as American. Right. We think of ourselves as sort of outsiders to America. But the whole Caribbean thinks of us as the Americans. So we're like in this weird space where we don't really know what to call ourselves. And we come into the United States and we are African Americans. And we're like, what is that? And I thought, what does it mean to be an American in the now? What does it mean to be an American in a woman's body, in a man's body, in a Black body, in a body that's been assaulted, in a body that is just discovering sex? Like, what does it mean? So I begin, and I don't know if you know this, Gloria, because I don't know what copy of the book you got, but in the final copy of the book, there's a very intricate map.
I have the arc.
Okay, so in the final copy, map, and it's a map that like lands on every place that the characters go, and so and you see that the characters really go the length of the United States. And that first chapter where they begin driving away from the San Francisco earthquake is me also like thinking through like, what does it mean to be like an American in this actual space? Like, what does it mean to be like in the geography of the United States, of North America? And the two characters who drive away in that car have to contend with the geography of America. And they find it beautiful. They find it also assaultive. They find it all kinds of things. But that story is all about that. And like, what is more American than a freaking road trip? Right? Nothing. Like, what is more American than a car? So I feel like putting them in a car, giving them a road trip, was like a way to also symbolize that this is a book about American identity.
Oh, I love that. I think my last question for you is because, as I said in the beginning, I love your energy, and cover your ears if you don't like curse words, you guys. So I'm about to say it. I just love the fact that like you give no fucks. You know what I mean? Like you really have like, you write freely and deeply, and you don't have a sense of reservation. It just feels very innovative and experimental and like out there with just like such pride. Can you give us any insight on how you were able to cultivate this type of just like strength and just confidence in self? And for the writers and the folks watching that want to emulate this energy, how does one do it? And how does one do it with like, just with honesty and integrity?
Yeah, my mother was a librarian. My grandmother was a librarian. They were also storytellers and writers. My grandmother was the writer of the family. My mother was the writer of the family. I'm the one that ended up being the author, like getting the book published, But I say that to say that in some ways I'm like 3 generations in the making. And that does give me a kind of confidence. Like, I think if I was the first writer in the family, it would have given me more reservation. But to know that this the dream that I'm living in actuality was my mother's and my grandmother's. It feels like it would be a fucking insult to them to make it small, to like make it tight, to be scared. It would be giving them the finger, because they sacrificed to make sure that by the third generation, a writer would be made in the family in a published kind of way. Because it was their dream too, you know. But so I feel like I'm doing it for them, and I better do it bravely and openly. But I also think that coming, like I said, I grew up in this super rough neighborhood, but I went to the fancy private schools on my island. I was scholarshiped and got to go to those schools. And my first writing self was, you know, much more invested in that sort of private school identity that I had.
Yep.
And I didn't think that I could write from my round the field, like hood identity. And I actually remember, like, when I first started publishing stories, I was at home in my house. I was sitting on the steps, and a friend, like a guy from the hood, was like, "Hey, we hear you're the writer. Like, this is just the neighborhood dudes." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm writing, you know." Like, I had a couple stories published, and they were like, "So what are you saying about us?" And I realized that I had not written at all about like the neighborhood I was from and like the people I grew up around. I had been kind of ashamed of them, or I had thought maybe they weren't worthy of literature or something. And he sort of just like challenged me, like, you know, what do you? He wasn't even like, he didn't even say like, "Are you writing about us?" He was like, "What are you writing about us?"
Like, come on.
Like, but also like the assumptive that like you must be writing about us because we are important. You know, I was like, shit, I must be writing about us. Like, he just laid that on me in many ways, and I tried to be true to my own complexity. Because why the fuck not?
And that is the perfect way to end. Well, I just want to thank you for this conversation. I loved your book, and I know everyone who is watching and planning to read it will love it as well. Thank you for just being you and like inspiring us to be our full selves. I'm going to call ER back onto the stage. He has some closing remarks and book buying tips.
Yes, thank you so much. This was a lovely conversation. We would love for folks to buy Monster in the Middle from Karis. You just click this teal button at the bottom center of the screen. We do have a few signed copies left because we got to do an in-person event as part of the Decatur Book Festival with Tiffany, and she generously signed books. We also have a few signed copies of her first novel. So if you somehow missed that, you can pick that up from Karis as well. I do want to make sure folks know that you can go ahead and register for next week's event with Gloria Edim and Edwidge Danticat. It is on the 26th. You can join for free. Just click that link that's in the chat. So keep the party rolling next week. And thank you both so much for being here and celebrating this book with us, Tiffany. And it's always a pleasure. We're very proud to claim you as a pseudo hometown friend at this point. So we're glad to have Emory folks in the house with us, and I know Emory's very proud of you as well. So it's lovely. And last thing I'll say is I'll add captions to this and put it up on our YouTube channel so folks can check that out and share that link as well very soon. So I hope that you both stay safe and well, and until next time, take care.
Thank you, Tiffany.